The winter wind howled across the mountain pass, driving sheets of icy sleet against the wooden shutters of the rusting Boar Inn. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cheap ale, roasting grease, and unwashed wool. 19-year-old Emma Carter scrubbed the grease-stained oak table with a frayed rag, her fingers raw and red from the freezing water. She wore a faded brown dress that was 2 sizes too small, patched at the elbows and knees. Yet, despite the dirt and grueling labor, her posture remained naturally straight, and her dark green eyes held a quiet, unbroken dignity. "Faster, girl," barked Master Gort, the corpulent innkeeper, slapping his heavy hand onto the counter. "The snow is blocking the high road. We'll have a house full of stranded travelers tonight, and if the broth isn't hot, I'll take the cost out of your wages." "It is ready, Master Gort," Emma replied softly, keeping her gaze lowered to hide the flicker of quiet anger in her eyes. Wages were a cruel joke. Gort barely gave her enough stale bread and thin cabbage soup to survive. Emma reached under her collar, her fingers absently brushing against a small, hard object hidden beneath her thin linen shift, a heavy silver pendant shaped like a leaping wolf entangled in trailing ivy. Her mother, Rebecca Carter, had carried it for years and placed it in Emma's hands on her deathbed 5 years ago. Rebecca had received it from her own mother, Grace Carter, and had protected it until the end. It was the only memory Emma possessed of her family, passed down from grandmother to mother before finally resting against Emma's heart. Suddenly, the heavy iron-reinforced doors of the inn were thrown open. A freezing gust of wind blew into the tavern, flickering the oil lamps and making the patrons shiver. 3 men stepped through the threshold, shaking snow from their heavy fur cloaks. The tavern fell dead silent. These were not common merchants or local hunters. The man in the center stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and imposing. He wore a dark leather coat lined with white fox fur, and at his hip hung a long broadsword with a pommel shaped like a wolf's head. But it was his presence that paralyzed the room, a suffocating, invisible weight that pressed down on every heart in the tavern. It was the aura of an alpha. And not just any alpha. "A room for the night," the leader demanded, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the quiet tavern. "And food for my men." Master Gort practically tripped over his own feet as he rushed out from behind the bar, bowing so low his nose nearly touched the grease-stained floor. "My lord. Welcome, welcome to the rusting Boar. Right this way to the private booth by the hearth." Emma watched from the kitchen doorway as the stranger sat down. She felt a strange, electric shiver run down her spine as his amber eyes briefly brushed past her. Deep within her chest, the silver pendant suddenly felt unnaturally warm against her skin. By midnight, the tavern had emptied as patrons retreated to their drafty rooms or passed out drunk near the hearth. The blizzard outside raged with renewed fury, rattling the wooden beams of the old inn. In the dimly lit kitchen, Emma sat on a small wooden stool near the dying embers of the stove, nursing a single bowl of thin, lukewarm broth. It was her only meal of the day. She heard quiet, heavy footsteps approaching down the stone hallway. Looking up, she saw the broad-shouldered stranger standing in the doorway. Up close, without his heavy fur cloak, she could see the sharp, noble lines of his jaw, the faint scar running along his left cheekbone, and the exhaustion weighing down his amber eyes. Emma instantly stood up, clutching her apron. "My lord, do you require more ale? I can fetch Master Gort." "No," the man interjected softly, raising a gloved hand to stop her. "My men are asleep. I came to secure our horses in the stable, but I smelled fresh pine smoke." He looked at her meager bowl of soup, then at her pale, thin frame. "You work late, little one." Emma swallowed hard, her pulse fluttering. "There is much to clean, my lord. Master Gort does not tolerate idleness." The stranger reached into his leather belt, pulled out a heavy velvet pouch, and placed a gold coin onto the wooden table. It landed with a dull, rich thud. "Fetch me whatever solid food remains in your pantry," he commanded calmly. "And keep the change for your trouble." Emma looked at the gold coin in disbelief. That single coin was worth more than Master Gort made in a month. But instead of reaching for the money, she looked up into his amber eyes and shook her head slowly. "I cannot take your gold, my lord," Emma said quietly. "Master Gort checks the pantry inventory every night. If he sees a whole loaf of bread or cured ham missing, he will accuse me of theft, no matter how many gold coins are on the table." The stranger's dark eyebrows rose in mild surprise. "You refuse gold?" "I refuse a beating," Emma corrected gently. She turned to the stove, picked up her own untouched bowl of warm broth and a small piece of dark rye bread, and offered them to him with steady hands. "This is my own portion. It is not fit for a lord, but it is hot, and it is clean. Please, take it. The cold out there eats at a man's bones." The Alpha King, for it was Ethan Blackwood himself, stared at the young woman before him. For years, he had been surrounded by nobles who flattered him for power and enemies who sought his life. Yet here, in a filthy roadside tavern, a starving girl was offering him her only meal out of pure, unselfish kindness. Ethan slowly reached out and took the bowl. A strange warmth passed between them. "What is your name?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than before. "Emma," she whispered. "Just Emma." Ethan studied her for another quiet moment before looking away. He had spent years hearing nobles speak of loyalty, duty, and honor, yet very few had demonstrated those things when there was nothing to gain. This girl's simple kindness unsettled him more than any political challenge. He knew his mother would understand why. Queen Dowager Eleanor had always told him that the measure of a person's character was revealed when they had almost nothing left to give. As Ethan looked at the untouched crumbs beside Emma's empty bowl, he already knew he would tell his mother about the girl who had given a stranger her last meal. The morning brought a crisp, pale sunlight reflecting off the deep snowdrifts. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a frozen, white wilderness. Emma was out in the courtyard early, carrying 2 heavy wooden buckets of well water across the slick ice. Her hands were numb, and her breath puffed in white clouds in the freezing morning air. Near the stable, Ethan and his 2 guards were saddling their massive black warhorses. Captain Kenneth, his second in command, leaned over to whisper to his king. "Sire, the royal scouts report the eastern pass is clear. We should reach the capital in 3 days." "Good," Ethan replied, pulling the girth strap tight on his stallion. But his eyes kept drifting toward the slender girl struggling with the heavy buckets across the yard. As Emma walked past the stable entrance, her foot caught on a patch of black ice. She slipped, losing her balance with a sharp cry. Before she hit the hard ground, a pair of strong arms caught her effortlessly. "Steady," Ethan murmured. I am sorry, my lord." Emma stammered. As she moved, the top button of her faded dress popped loose from the strain. The heavy silver pendant slipped out from beneath her shift, swinging freely in the bright morning sunlight. The silver wolf and trailing ivy caught the rays of the winter sun. Ethan's body went completely rigid. Captain Kenneth stared at the pendant. "By the ancestors. That is the crest of the House of Carter." Ethan stared at the silver crest, not at Emma's face. He knew that emblem. Every member of the royal family had been taught its history. The wolf entwined with ivy was the ancient crest of House Carter. But the sight of it did not tell him who Emma was. A pendant could be inherited, stolen, or hidden for generations. He needed the truth before he dared make an accusation. "Where did you get this?" Ethan demanded, his voice dropping into a low, controlled tone. "Tell me exactly who gave it to you." Emma clutched the pendant protectively. "It belonged to my mother," she whispered. "Rebecca Carter. She said it belonged to her mother before her. My grandmother was Grace Carter." Ethan went completely still. Grace. The name struck him with the force of a forgotten wound. He looked at Emma again, but this time he did not trust resemblance. He trusted the chain of evidence she had just given him. Rebecca Carter, he repeated quietly. And Grace was your grandmother? Emma nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. She died before I was old enough to remember her. Ethan looked toward Captain Kenneth. We need records. We need testimony. And we need the truth. He turned back to Emma. Until we have it, no one will touch you. 10 minutes later, Master Gort stood trembling in the middle of the tavern while 2 royal guards stood on either side of him. Ethan remained seated, his expression cold but controlled. Captain Kenneth held a sealed royal warrant rather than a weapon. Emma stood beside the hearth, still shivering in her wet dress, completely bewildered by the sudden storm unfolding around her. 23 years ago, Ethan began, a noble lady named Grace Carter was accused of high treason against the crown. She was alleged to have stolen the royal succession ledger and fled into the northern wilderness. Ethan stood. Her family name was stripped of all honors, their land seized, and their descendants declared outlaws. For 23 years, the Carter name has been remembered as a stain of dishonor upon this kingdom. He turned toward Emma. My mother, Queen Dowager Eleanor, was Grace Carter's dearest friend. On Grace's final night, she swore that Grace was innocent. She believed corrupt lords had framed her to seize control of the northern trade routes. Emma's eyes widened. Your mother knew my grandmother? Knew her? Ethan replied softly. She loved her like a sister. Ethan reached toward the pendant. This pendant is not mere jewelry. The Carter family used it as a hereditary seal. Grace entrusted it to Rebecca. Rebecca carried it until her death 5 years ago, and Rebecca entrusted it to you. Emma touched the pendant. My mother never told me why it mattered. Because she may never have known the entire truth, Ethan replied. He drew a small silver pocket knife from his belt. May I? Emma nodded. Ethan made a tiny, delicate prick on Emma's index finger and pressed a single drop of her blood against the center of the silver wolf's eye. A sharp metallic click echoed through the silent room. The pendant opened like a blooming flower, revealing a tiny hidden compartment. Inside rested a folded piece of yellowed parchment sealed with dark red wax bearing the royal seal of the late king. Ethan unfolded the parchment with extreme care. This is written in Lord Malaker's hand, he said. He wrote this confession himself and sealed it with his own royal signet. But the document alone does not tell us why he wrote it or who else was involved. He looked toward Emma. It proves there was a confession. It does not yet prove the entire conspiracy. For that, we need the original royal records. Master Gort sank to his knees. I knew nothing, Your Majesty. Rebecca arrived here dying 5 years ago. I only kept the girl because you needed cheap labor, Emma said quietly. Gort lowered his eyes. Ethan motioned to the guards. Take him into custody. He will answer for the conditions under which Emma was kept here. Ethan looked at Emma. You are not simply a kitchen maid, Emma. He held up the parchment. You are Lady Emma Carter, last surviving heir of the House of Carter. And today, we begin uncovering what happened to your family. The journey to the capital was a blur of luxury and overwhelming change for Emma. She was wrapped in heavy velvet cloaks lined with silver fox fur and seated inside the royal carriage, shielded from the biting cold. For the first time in her life, she ate warm, rich meals, roasted pheasant, soft white bread, and sweet winter berries. Yet, despite the sudden comfort, Emma felt out of place. On the third evening, as they made camp at a fortified royal outpost, Ethan stepped into her tent carrying a warm cup of herbal tea. You are quiet, Lady Emma, Ethan said gently. Emma looked down at her hands. A week ago, I was scrubbing floors for a stale crust of bread. Now people bow to me and call me lady. It feels like a dream I will wake up from. Ethan set the tea down. It is no dream, Emma. But I understand your fear. The court at the capital is filled with vultures who wear silk and velvet. Will they accept me? They will have to face the truth, Ethan replied. I gave my word that I would restore your family's honor, and an alpha king does not break his vow. He paused. And when we reach the capital, there is someone who has waited 23 years to hear Grace Carter's name spoken without shame. Emma looked up. Your mother? Yes. Queen Dowager Eleanor. His expression softened. She will want to know everything about you. And I suspect she will want to hear about the girl who gave a stranger her only meal. Emma's cheeks warmed. It was only soup. It was your only soup, Ethan replied. The terrifying king who had entered the tavern 3 days ago no longer seemed unreachable. He had become her protector, his strength a steady anchor in the chaotic storm of her new life. For days later, the majestic white stone towers of the royal citadel rose against the winter sky. Banners of dark blue and gold fluttered from the parapets as the royal procession entered the grand gates. Emma was brought directly to the grand library. There, waiting by the grand hearth, was Queen Dowager Eleanor. Though her hair was silver and her face lined with age, her eyes were sharp and filled with fierce intelligence. When she saw Emma, tears welled in the old queen's eyes. Grace's eyes, Eleanor whispered. She rushed forward and embraced Emma. You have your grandmother's eyes, child. Welcome home. After a long emotional reunion, Eleanor held Emma at arm's length. You are Grace's granddaughter. Yes, your Grace. Eleanor smiled gently. And you are the girl Ethan told me about. Emma blinked. The girl. The girl at the rusting Boar, Eleanor said. Ethan told me that a starving young woman gave a stranger her only bowl of broth and piece of bread. He could not stop talking about it. Emma lowered her eyes. Eleanor smiled through her tears. I wondered what kind of person could possess so little and still choose to give. Ethan placed the tiny parchment from the pendant onto the massive mahogany desk. Mother, this confession proves Grace was framed, he said. To complete the formal restoration before the High Council, we need to match this confession with the official royal succession ledger from 23 years ago. Archivist Vane hurried over carrying a massive, iron-bound leather book. Here it is, Your Majesty. Emma stepped closer. She pulled the book toward her. The pages were numbered sequentially, page 141, page 142, page 144. Emma froze. Ethan, she whispered. Look at this. A clean, razor-thin line of fibrous paper remained along the inner margin. Page 143 had been carefully sliced out of the ledger. Eleanor's expression hardened. The page that could complete the truth is missing. How is this possible? Ethan demanded. Archivist Vane shook his head. The deep archive is locked with royal wards. Only members of the High Council have access to these ledgers. Emma stared at the missing gap. Page 143 was the exact page that recorded the original trial of Grace Carter. Someone knew we would come for this book, Emma said quietly. Lord Malachar may be dead, but those who benefited from his conspiracy may still hold influence within the council. Ethan's expression hardened. Then we will bring them to light. He turned toward Kenneth. Kenneth. Summon the High Council to the Grand Chamber immediately. An hour later, the massive doors of the Grand Chamber closed. 40 high lords and nobles sat in tiered stone pews. Emma stood in the center of the marble floor, wearing an emerald green dress that complemented her eyes. My lords. Ethan's voice boomed across the chamber. 23 years ago, an innocent family was destroyed by treachery within this very hall. Today, we stand to correct history. Lord Geoffrey stood. Your Majesty, the Carter name was stripped by royal decree. To overturn a 23-year-old conviction requires indisputable proof from the royal ledger. The ledger was tampered with, Captain Kenneth declared. Page 143 was stolen. Jeers and whispers broke out. A missing page proves nothing. Emma stepped forward. The missing page proves that someone is still afraid of the truth. She reached into her bodice and pulled out the parchment. This is the signed confession of Lord Malachar, preserved within the Carter crest. It details the lies used to frame my grandmother. Eleanor rose from her seat. And tomorrow, she said, her voice calm but commanding, we will determine what else remains hidden. Lord Geoffrey sneered, stepping down toward the marble floor. A scrap of paper from a dead traitor? Anyone could have forged that handwriting, girl. Ethan stepped down from the dais, his alpha aura flaring in full force. The sheer physical weight of his presence forced Geoffrey back a step, his face pale with sudden fear. Then let the blood decide, Ethan said coldly. He turned to Archivist Vane. Bring the basin of truth. A heavy bronze basin filled with enchanted spring water was brought to the center of the hall. The basin of truth was an ancient royal artifact. When an official document was placed inside along with the blood of the rightful heir, the magic within the water would project the memory of the seal's creation into the air. The basin could authenticate the document's origin, but it could not judge the truth of every claim within it. Emma walked up to the basin without hesitation. She took the small silver dagger from Ethan's hand, pricked her palm, and allowed 3 drops of her blood to fall into the clear water. Then, she dropped Malachar's confession into the basin. The water glowed with a brilliant, blinding blue light. A shimmering, 3-dimensional projection rose from the basin into the air of the council hall. The nobles gasped in shock as the spectral image of Lord Malachar appeared, sitting at his desk 23 years ago, his face twisted with malice as he wrote the confession and sealed it with his own ring. Malachar had written the confession as insurance when he realized his crimes might eventually be exposed. The voice of Malachar echoed through the silent chamber, "May this confession protect my soul from damnation." Grace Carter was innocent. I framed her to seize the northern trade routes. The projection faded, leaving the council chamber in absolute, dead silence. Ethan stared at the fading image for several seconds before speaking. The basin has proven that Malachar himself wrote and sealed this confession 23 years ago, he said. But it does not tell us whether every man named in this confession was involved, nor does it reveal how far his conspiracy reached. Emma looked toward the assembled nobles. She understood immediately. The confession had proven Grace's innocence, but the larger corruption behind her family's downfall could still contain unanswered questions. Lord Geoffrey fell to his knees, unable to speak. Several nobles exchanged frightened glances. Queen Dowager Eleanor stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Then we will separate what has been proven from what remains to be investigated. Grace Carter's innocence is no longer in doubt. But the crown will not pretend that one revelation answers every question. Ethan nodded. Exactly. The truth has opened the door. Now we must decide what to do with what lies beyond it. Ethan stepped up beside Emma, taking her hand and holding it high before the assembled lords. By the blood of the truth and the authority of the crown, Ethan's voice echoed like thunder, I declare the House of Carter fully restored. All lands, titles, and honors are hereby returned to Lady Emma Carter. The southern and northern lords stood up, erupting into thunderous applause and cheers. Queen Dowager Eleanor smiled through her tears, stepping forward to place a delicate crown of woven silver ivy upon Emma's head. Emma looked up into Ethan's warm amber eyes. He squeezed her hand gently, a rare, breathtaking smile breaking across his handsome face. You did it, Emma, Ethan whispered softly. Your family is free. Emma felt a tear of joy slip down her cheek, her thumb gently tracing the silver ring on her finger. The long, freezing night at the rusting Boar was finally over, and a bright new dawn was beginning. 2 years passed since the restoration of the Carter name, yet the tranquility of the capital was never complete. Beyond the pine forests and snow-capped peaks, unrest began to rise in the northern marches. Reports reached the royal council of border villages being displaced by rogue packs, disorganized bands of wolf shifters cast out from exiled clans. "They are savages, sire," declared Lord Geoffrey. "We must march the royal vanguard northeast before they unite." Ethan shook his head. "Indiscriminate force will only push moderate border clans into their ranks. Hunger makes desperate people dangerous. If we respond with blind force, we provoke a full-scale border war." Standing behind the king's chair, Emma spoke. "The refugees arriving at Grace's Haven speak of blighted crops and frozen rivers in the north. They are not marching for war. They are fleeing starvation." Geoffrey looked at her. "Statecraft and warfare are matters of blood and iron, not charity." "Statecraft built purely on iron eventually rusts," Ethan replied. He turned toward Emma. "Her sanctuary has integrated more than 300 northern refugees without violence. Mercy, when organized, produces stability." Emma looked at the maps. "The same corruption that destroyed my grandmother's name did not disappear when Malachir died. It left wounds in places the crown barely remembers." Ethan stood. "I will travel to the marches myself." He looked at Emma. "And I ask Lady Emma to accompany me." That night, Emma stood on her balcony. Ethan approached from behind. "You don't have to come." Emma turned. "Your father tried to rule the north through fear, Ethan. You are trying to heal it." "I am going." Ethan smiled. "Then we face the frost together." The expedition set out at first light. A convoy of supply wagons loaded with grain, salted meats, and heavy blankets wound through the mountain passes, escorted by 50 royal guards. For 6 days, the journey was peaceful. On the 7th afternoon, the convoy reached Frostbite Pass. The air became unnaturally still. "Halt!" Ethan commanded. His sharp senses detected the scent of unwashed fur and smoke. "Defensive positions," Captain Kenneth ordered. Dozens of shadowy figures appeared along the cliffs, blocking the narrow pass. Some were armed with crude tools, while others stood in half-shifted forms, their expressions hardened by hunger and desperation. "Stop the convoy," a scarred leader shouted. The royal guards immediately formed a protective line around the wagons. Ethan stepped forward. "No one needs to die here." The rogue shifters hesitated. Inside the carriage, Emma noticed 4 figures moving toward the rear wagon. Among them was a boy, no older than 14, his hands raw and blue from the cold. A royal guard moved toward him. "Stop!" Emma cried. She stepped from the carriage. The guard froze. Emma approached the boy slowly. "You're starving." The boy stared at her. Emma removed her own wool scarf and wrapped it around his shoulders. "You don't have to steal this. We brought it for you." The boy looked at the wagons. "You brought food?" A massive gray-furred wolf appeared on the ridge. He slowly shifted into a tall, weather-beaten man. His eyes fixed on Emma's pendant. "The wolf and the ivy," he whispered. He looked at Ethan. "You are the king who cleared Grace Carter's name." "I am." "And this is Emma Carter." Ethan nodded. "We came to offer terms of peace, not slaughter." The chieftain lowered his axe. Then he knelt. "If the blood of Grace Carter vouches for the king, the northern marches will listen." The confrontation transformed into a makeshift encampment. Campfires were lit. Royal guards and northern villagers sat together, sharing bowls of hot food. Inside the chieftain's tent, Ethan, Emma, and Chieftain Torrin sat around a low brazier. "For 10 years, Lord Malachir's tax collectors bled our lands dry," Torrin explained. "When the blights came, the capital turned its back on us. Ethan listened. Malaker's influence is dead, Torin. His lies destroyed many lives, including Emma's family. I cannot undo the past, but I can offer you a future. He unrolled a treaty. The northern marches will be recognized as an autonomous province under royal protection. You will receive annual grain shipments from the southern valleys. In return, the northern clans will guard the mountain passes. Torin stared at the document. You would give us land and grain? I demand only peace and loyalty. Ethan looked toward Emma. And one more thing. He pointed to the final clause. A permanent station for Grace's Haven will be built here in the Northern Valley. Torin's eyes filled with tears. No child should ever have to hold a dagger to earn a bowl of soup. Emma lowered her eyes. She remembered the rusting boar. One bowl of broth. One piece of bread. One stranger. Torin signed the treaty. The wolf and the ivy have brought spring to the frost. 6 months later, the capital was bathed in the warm golden light of midsummer. Banners hung from every stone balcony. Inside the royal cathedral, sunlight poured through stained glass windows. Ethan stood at the altar in formal white and gold Alpha King regalia. The doors opened. Emma stepped onto the white carpet. She wore an ivory silk gown embroidered with delicate silver ivy leaves. Around her neck rested the restored Carter pendant. Eleanor watched from the front pew. Tears filled her eyes. Emma reached the altar. Ethan took her hand. You take my breath away, he whispered. You don't look so bad yourself, Your Majesty, Emma teased. The high priest raised his hands. We stand here today to unite 2 souls, 2 bloodlines, and 2 halves of a kingdom. The vows were spoken. Rings were exchanged. I pronounce Ethan Blackwood and Emma Carter as king and queen. The crowd erupted. Later that night, Emma and Ethan stood together beneath the stars. I was thinking about that night at the inn, Emma said softly. I thought I was giving away my very last meal. Ethan looked at her. And what do you have now? Emma smiled. I have everything. Eleanor watched them from a short distance away. For a moment, she remembered what Ethan had told her. A starving young woman at a roadside and had given a stranger her only meal. Eleanor had never forgotten that story. She had never forgotten the girl either. Now that girl was standing beside her son as queen. Eleanor smiled. Kindness, she whispered, always finds its way home. The long, freezing night at the rusting Boar was over. But the work Emma and Ethan had begun was only entering a new chapter. Their kingdom had found peace. For now. 3 years of peace transformed the realm. Yet a kingdom as vast as Blackwood was never entirely free from ambition. Beyond the eastern borders lay the wealthy Duchy of Ethelgard, ruled by Duke Raymond. Inside the palace, Queen Emma spent her mornings overseeing the expanding network of Grace's Haven. However, the arrival of an unexpected royal courier disrupted the quiet. The messenger carried a sealed invitation from Duke Raymond and his daughter, Lady Juliana. Eleanor met Emma in the private garden. Raymond has never accepted my late husband's final decree, Eleanor said. He believes his family was passed over during the succession 23 years ago. Emma looked at her. But Grace's case was settled. Her name was restored, Eleanor replied. But the old conspiracy was never completely understood. Some records disappeared. Some political connections were never explained. Emma grew thoughtful. 2 days later, the Eastern delegation arrived. At the formal banquet, Raymond raised his goblet. The capital has changed under your reign, Your Majesty. Though I must admit, the Eastern lords are surprised to hear that royal coffers are being spent on free soup houses rather than fortifying our eastern watchtowers. Ethan replied calmly. Fortresses guard borders from enemies. Grain guards are people from misery. Raymond turned toward Emma. A compassionate philosophy, no doubt influenced by your Grace's unique background. The insult was clear. Emma did not flinch. Intimacy with the truth is a ruler's greatest asset, Duke Raymond. A murmur of approval moved through the hall. Raymond's smile stiffened. A sharp tongue, Your Grace. Emma smiled politely. And a clear memory. Across the table, Eleanor watched silently. She knew the Eastern Court had not come simply to discuss trade. Late on the third night of the Duke's visit, Emma sat in the royal study reviewing supply reports. A sudden knock interrupted her. Archivist Vane's young assistant, Leo, entered. Your Grace. The deep archive, someone bypassed the wards. Emma stood. Was anything taken? The vault of the 23rd winter. The original succession records. Emma immediately followed him. Inside the vault, the glass case was open. The original ledger lay exposed. It was open to page 143. A cloaked figure stood beside it. Emma stepped forward. Put it down. The figure froze. The hood fell. Lady Juliana. In her hand was a forged parchment. You shouldn't have come down here alone, Juliana said. Emma remained calm. Why are you replacing page 143? Juliana smiled. This forged page claims my father was the rightful heir. Tomorrow, he will present it before the High Council. Emma looked at the genuine page. A lie built on forged ink will never stand against the truth. Juliana moved toward the document. Emma stepped between her and the archive. Step away. Juliana hesitated. Emma raised her voice. Guards. Footsteps echoed through the corridor. Juliana suddenly rushed toward the original record, trying to seize it before the guards arrived. Emma pulled the page away from the brazier. At that moment, Ethan entered with Captain Kenneth and 6 royal guards. Juliana, Ethan said coldly. She froze. The game is over. Emma moved with instincts forged not in courtly dance halls, but through years of survival and the combat training Ethan had insisted she receive. She sidestepped the thrust, her hand wrapping around Juliana's wrist and twisting it sharply downward. The stiletto clattered against the stone floor. Juliana hissed in pain, using her momentum to shove Emma hard against a heavy oak bookshelf. Books rained down around them as the two women grappled in the dim candlelight. Juliana, driven by desperate ambition, reached for the forged document, attempting to slide it into the ancient binding while snatching the original page 143 to throw into a lit brazier nearby. No! Emma cried out. She lunged forward, throwing her body between the genuine parchment and the flames. The original document fell safely onto the stone floor away from the fire. But Juliana seized a heavy bronze candle holder from a nearby table and brought it swinging down toward Emma's head. Emma raised her left arm to block the strike. Clang! The heavy bronze struck the silver pendant hanging from Emma's neck. The ancient, thick silver absorbed the brunt of the blow with a sharp metallic ring, throwing Juliana off balance. Before the noblewoman could recover, heavy footsteps thundered down the spiral staircase. The iron doors were slammed open, and Alpha King Ethan burst into the vault, his broadsword drawn, his amber eyes blazing with terrifying fury. Behind him, Captain Kenneth and 6 royal guards flooded the room. Ethan's alpha aura unleashed in full force, a suffocating wave of pressure that slammed Juliana to her knees, leaving her gasping for air on the cold stone floor. Emma. Ethan dropped his sword and rushed to his wife's side, pulling her into his arms, his hands frantically checking her face and arms for injury. Are you hurt? Tell me. I'm all right, Emma breathed, leaning into his strength, her pulse slowing down as his warmth surrounded her. She looked down at her chest. The silver pendant bore a fresh scratch on its surface, but the metal had held true, just as it had for 23 years. The real record is safe. Kenneth retrieved page 143 along with Juliana's forged replacement. The treason is absolute, Your Majesty. She was attempting to rewrite the royal lineage. Ethan turned his gaze toward Juliana, his expression so cold and lethal that even the guards instinctively held their breath. Drag her to the high dungeon, Ethan commanded, his deep voice carrying a terrifying vibration. And arrest Duke Raymond in his quarters before he can reach his horse. Juliana stared at Emma with disbelief and fury as the guards moved toward her. Emma lowered her gaze to the scratched pendant around her neck. Once again, the small silver crest had protected the Carter legacy from being erased. But this time, it had not protected only a secret. It had protected the truth. By morning, the treachery of the Eastern Duchy was laid bare before the High Council. The chemical evidence, the forged document, the testimony of Archivist Vane, and Juliana's confession established the conspiracy beyond reasonable doubt. Duke Raymond was stripped of his title and banished to the eastern border monasteries. The Duchy of Ethelgard was placed under royal stewardship, and its taxes were reduced. 3 weeks later, a small ceremony was held in the private royal archive. A master jeweler had repaired the silver pendant. The leaping wolf and trailing ivy gleamed beneath the royal lamps. Inside a reinforced glass vault, page 143 rested beside the pendant. Are you sure you want to leave it here? Eleanor asked. Emma looked at the pendant. Then she reached for Ethan's hand. The pendant did its job, Lady Eleanor. Eleanor smiled. How so? It carried Grace's secret to Rebecca, Rebecca's memory to me, and finally the truth back to the kingdom. Eleanor's eyes softened. And the girl who once gave Ethan her only food gave this kingdom something even greater. Emma looked at her. What was that? Eleanor reached for her hand. A reason to remember that mercy is not weakness. Ethan smiled. She taught me that before she ever knew who I was. Eleanor looked between them. That is why I never forgot her. Emma smiled. Thank you. Outside the high arched windows, the autumn breeze carried the distant sounds of the city below, children laughing near the fountains, merchants trading in the plazas, and the doors of Grace's haven standing wide open to welcome anyone in need. Emma looked toward the pendant resting safely inside the royal archive. Grace had left behind a name. Rebecca had carried its memory. Emma had carried it into the light. And one cold night at the rusting Boar, a starving girl had given away her only food to a stranger without knowing his name, his power, or his crown. Eleanor had never forgotten that girl. Neither had Ethan. And neither would the kingdom. Because sometimes, the smallest act of mercy becomes the beginning of a legacy far greater than any crown.